That's a tricky question because I can't really pinpoint when I became interested in art. I was always one of those kids who loved art class and felt like I was pretty good at drawing. Um, Although now when I compare myself to other drawers, I don't think that's true. But then photography really grabbed my attention, especially as a teenager. I started using an old-fashioned film camera. So I started thinking of myself as a photographer as a teenager. But as far as art, using photography in art, I didn't really consider that till college. And I started taking college courses in photography and in art. And then sort of realized what the possibilities of using photography, using that kind of imagery to make artwork is kind of an exciting possibility. And then many years went by where I kind of just did my own photography and my own artwork while I was working other jobs. And then finally I felt like I couldn't escape the idea of becoming an art photographer, and I went to do my MFA at that point. My graduate degree was at University of Minnesota for the MFA, and I studied biology as an undergrad at Oberlin College in Ohio. Yeah, I feel like in some projects it's very strongly linked, and in other projects not so much. Like in Drunken Forest, that was definitely inspired by ecology and what I was reading about. I think they're both linked maybe also by just curiosity. The curiosity to know more about biology, more about the living world, and the curiosity in art of just like figuring out how to do this or how to do that and how to portray something in a meaningful way via art. So that definitely links it, and I often make work inspired by our relationship to the natural world. A lot of my past projects have had to do with that link of us, how we experience the natural world or how we try to connect to the natural world. So I think this current project, Drunken Forest, that's being shown does link to that pretty well. So a lot of my work is inspired by what I read about biology or ecology, and sometimes a little bit more directly and sometimes more indirectly. I did an internship at a biological research station called Cedar Creek, which is north of the Twin Cities. It's part of the University of Minnesota. It's called Cedar Creek I always get this wrong, Cedar Creek Ecosystems Science Reserve. And they have an artist in residency program. So last summer and a little bit in the fall and winter too, I was there meeting scientists and working with scientists and doing some portraits of scientists, as well as going into the landscape and making some photos of the landscape. So that was definitely directly inspired by the scientists I was talking to and the landscape there. I went there in 2018 in the summer, and I had been reading about permafrost thaw and also drunken forests. As the Arctic is warming more quickly than most other places on Earth due to climate change, and permafrost thaw is one of the results of that. As you might imagine, as it warms, certain areas that are usually frozen, the ground is usually frozen, they'll have longer and longer periods of thaw, and that has pretty dramatic effects on the landscape where that happens. And so I had read about drunken forests, and they, and even in scientific research articles, they call them drunken forests, which I think is just such an evocative term. So in looking into that a little bit more, it's certain localized areas where the permafrost has thawed and the forest is no longer stable, and the trees sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly kind of collapse and become a drunken forest. They look kind of drunken because they're going every which way. So I'd read about that, and I thought that it would be really interesting to photograph that because I think that it's hard to make concrete the ways that climate change is affecting the world. Because a lot of us don't have a day-to-day experience of that unless, we're in a fire zone maybe, with what's happening in the West right now. or a hurricane. But in Minnesota, a lot of us don't have a direct experience of the changes that are already happening and that are coming. So I was interested in kind of visually capturing that idea. So I wrote a grant for a faculty research grant for my school where I teach and received it. So that allowed me to travel up there. And I stayed there for 2 weeks and photographed. And I, prior to going up there, I had contacted several scientists to get their ideas about where to photograph, for one thing, and also to meet with them. And that became part of the project too. I went to a BOG where they're doing scientific research and ended up loving some of the visuals that I found there. So that became part of the series as well. And you can see that in the Drunken Forest. There's like a plexiglass box that gathers gas from the bog, and the scientists analyze how that off-gassing changes. And there's like a bunch of tubes sticking up out of the ground. And that one is also a scientific instrument for measuring gas, as I understand it. I'm not a scientist, but it was really exciting to work with the scientists up there. Yeah, so that's what brought me there. It was a really incredible experience. The landscape is wild and just so huge. It's hard to fathom unless you're there just how vast the landscape is and how wild it is. I did get the chance to go to Denali, and I saw grizzlies and moose and caribou and lynx. It was kind of amazing. I think that it is hard for the everyday experience, it's hard to understand how climate change will affect you, or it's hard for scientists to communicate that. You know, a lot of times their role is to gather the data, analyze it, and they aren't necessarily the communicators of that. So I feel like art can help communicate that, or can help sort of synthesize how it will affect our culture, how it will affect our day-to-day lives. So, you know, I think that art has that power of communication, and also just making something more felt or more embodied, where you understand it a little bit differently when you see artwork about a certain topic. So yeah, I hope that people will see that in my artwork, but I don't know that they will for sure. It's always an if. So there's a 360-degree video in the gallery, and I made that with a 360 camera, and I hung it from a fishing wire, and then had it kind of moving up and down in the Drunken Forest. So that's what you're seeing in that video. It's kind of disorienting, and I liked that feeling because it also relates to the idea of the Drunken Forest. So it is a 360-degree video, but flattened into one screen or one orb. So that was a really fun project to do. And the other sort of media or element other than the photos in the video is the 3D photos. And I used just regular 35 negative film, and I have an old-fashioned stereo realist 3D camera from the 50s. And so I took those 3D photos kind of to reiterate how the space looks, but also it's in negative, so it also is sort of disorienting in that way. Yeah, I have a website, arecaroe.com, and I also have been active on Instagram, so that's just at Areca Roe. And I've been posting some more recent work from the stay-at-home times, the COVID times on Instagram, and then more from the Drunken Forest and also the Cedar Creek residency is on my website. I had hoped to go back to Alaska this summer and photograph more, and maybe photograph what has changed, and also photograph some of the scientists in a manner that I had done at Cedar Creek. But of course that changed. So I hope to go back to Alaska and photograph more and re-photograph some of the places that I already photographed to see how they've changed. So that is a hope for the future once we can travel.